Welcome back, everyone. My name is Mike, and this is Lesson 4 of the VS2013 C# Programming for Beginner tutorial series. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to dynamically create controls on a Windows form. So now I've got a new project dialog up here, and I've already took the liberty of naming our project, creating controls dynamically, and the solution name according to the rules we followed in previous lessons. And we have the create directory for solution checked as well. I'll click OK to get that started. Now, in the previous lesson, we learned how to, using the toolbox here, we drag some common controls like a button and a label and drop them onto the form and display the hello world message to the user. Now we're going to do something similar, displaying a message to the user. This time we're going to do it completely in code. We're not going to be dragging and dropping buttons and controls from the toolbox to the form. Now, as you remember in Lesson 3, one of the events that we used was the form load event, and we can get access to that by double-clicking on the form itself. Before we do that, let me just name our form as we did before as form main. And the start position, we're going to set it to start in the center of the screen. And we'll also name our form creating controls dynamically. Alright, so let's go ahead and double click the form. That opens up our, see here, the form load event handler skeleton code. And in between these braces is where we'll start typing our code. Now, the first thing we want to do is create, we're going to create two controls. One is a label, as we used in Lesson 3, and a button. So the name of the class to create a label is in fact called label. So in order to define a new label, we would type label, and then we type a name for our label, the way we're going to reference it in code. I'm going to go ahead and just use obj, object or obj, since once you actually dynamically add a control to the form, that variable is no longer needed at that point once it's added to the form, because the form keeps up with a copy of that control in what it's called the controls collection for that form. So we'll reuse the obj variable when we create our button as well. So label obj, and we use the equal sign. We're going to create a new one, new. What that's doing is allocating an instance of the label class as well as some memory management that's going on behind the scenes. So new label, open and close parentheses, and end it with a semicolon. Now the next thing we'll do is set some properties. Since we're creating a new instance of this label, we don't have the property window on the right side that we can easily access. So we'll need to set those properties in code. And the only common properties we need to be concerned with really is the location of the label, the text that appears on the label, and that's pretty much it for this example. So we have two ways that we can locate our label. One is by setting the top and left coordinates, or we can set using the location property, we can set a new point, which takes an X and a Y coordinate for the top left corner of the label control and displays it there. So we'll use the point method. Seems a little bit cleaner. So we can say obj, then hit dot, location. That's going to be the upper left corner that we're going to set relative to the current form that it's in, equals, and then we'll do we've got to create a new point object, and we'll pass it the X and Y value. So let's say we'll set it label at 20, 20. And that's it. Now the other thing we need to do is set the actual caption, or text. So obj.text, so text property, equals hello world. So we've assigned some text, a literal string called hello world, to the text property of our label object. And now the last thing we need to do is add this control, label control, to the form. Now in order to do that, we actually need to reference the form. Now, since we're actually writing this code in the form itself, and we don't have a instance of this form here at this point because we're actually writing the code in it, an instance of the form is actually created at runtime, not during design time. So there's a special keyword that we can use called the this keyword, and what that does is kind of a self-reference to the current form object that we're working within. And you can see, if you look at these, our form object is up here, form main, and from here to here, any code, as long as you're writing code within or between these two curly braces right here, within any of these methods or event handlers, you can use the this keyword to access the form. So what we're going to type is this, and then hit dot. And now there's a collection called controls, and that basically holds all the controls that are part of this form. And it has some methods, so we'll hit another dot operator. It has a method called add, which will allow us to add a new control to the controls list or collection that's on this form. So choose add, open close parenthesis, and we're going to add obj. That's the new label object, control object that we've created. So we'll add it like that. And then once you've used it and you've actually added it to the form, there's a common practice of resetting that object variable using the null keyword. It's a special keyword in C# that basically clears the memory for the object and makes that variable reusable if you need it. C# actually has what a technology, and they call it garbage collection. But what it is it's a technology that will handle your memory management for you, and when you release memory from an object or a variable or any kind of reference that you use, it will release that memory back to the operating system and it'll be available for the application to use. So you always want to set your references to objects to null when you're finished with them. Now, we're going to also at the same time add a button. So that's, and actually, believe it or not, the class name for that is button, just as you would think. So button obj equals new button. It's going to create that new instance of that button object. And now we'll say obj dot, and we want to set, again, we use the location property to set that as well. New point. We're going to locate the button underneath the label. So if we know we've set the label at an X value of 20, which is the horizontal one, Y of 20, which is the vertical point, we want to move the, we want to keep the button at the same X value, so it'll be lined up with that label. But we want to make it quite a bit lower than the label, so we're going to change the Y value to 40. Now by default, I just know that the point size, that's the default for C# labels or label control, generally creates a label that's approximately somewhere in the 12, 13, 14 pixel height. So when we go to 20 down, we're going to make sure that it's not overlapping that label. So that's how I went to 40, from 20 to 40. Alright, so we've got the location. Next thing we want to do is set the text of our label. And so we're going to say obj.text equal, and on the button we want to have it say display message. What we're going to do is when we generate this button, we are going to have an event handler that we're going to write for the click event of this button, that when you click display message, the button display message it'll pop up the message box that show hello world that we had before in the previous lesson. So, and then we can also add this control to there. The one thing you need to do on this, and I may need to do it on the label, is there's an auto size property, and that makes sure that the button is sized the correct width of the text property that we're setting to it. So we'll set auto size to true. And the next thing we need to do is set up our click event handler. This has to be done before you add the button to the form. So we're going to do that. I generally do it last after I set all the the visual properties of a button. And so we'll do the obj dot, and the event name is actually click. If you type CLI, you get to that. You can tell that this is the correct property because number one, it has a lightning bolt to the left of it. If you look here, there's a lightning bolt symbol. That means that's an event that can be triggered on this. And the way you add an event handler to this event name is you hit a space and then you type a plus and an equals. And when you do that, Visual Studio knows that you're trying to add an event handler to that event, and it'll ask you to press tab to automatically insert an event handler called obj_click. And so it's probably best to do that because it will automatically set up your skeleton code for that, so you don't need to remember to put the object sender, comma, event argz like you normally see on some of these events and event handlers. So we'll go ahead and hit tab, and we'll hit tab again to auto-generate the handler for that event that we just set up. So we'll hit tab twice, second time, and you'll see it's automatically put that in there. Now, they add this line of code called throw a new not implemented exception, and what that's going to do is just put kind of like a reminder you haven't implemented that. When you actually implement this click event handler and put your own code in there, you'll want to remove that throw new not implemented exception. We're going to leave that in there just so that we can see what it does there. And let's see, got a okay, apparently it's not liking this, even though we've nullified this object. It doesn't like the fact that we're reusing it. It's already been defined in the scope within this block of code. You generally can't have you cannot have two variable names with the same name, and because we're defining different types, there's an issue there. So what we'll do is we'll just set this to obj2. We'll just change all these to add a 2 to the end of it. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to do is, again, we're going to add it to the form. So this dot controls dot add obj2, and then we'll say obj2 equals null. So that's the code that will actually add these two controls, a label and a button, to our form main. And on the button, we've set up an event handler for that. Now the label will automatically just display hello world. The button will have a message that says display message on it, and when the user clicks that, it'll execute this object click event handler here, and it'll execute any code that's in here. We're going to leave this in there, like I said, to throw. We're going to test it out before we actually do what else we want to do in there. We're going to leave it that way. I'm going to hit F5 to have it save, build, and then run. I guess we still have it overlapping a little bit. We may need to readjust that. But anyways, you see it's added that label control to our form with the word or the text hello world in it, created our button with the phrase display message, and auto sized it to make sure that fit in there. So now we'll click that. See what happens. See, it's executing an error. This is a way to throw an actual intentional error exception to be handled by the program, but that tells you the exception is not implemented. That's just to help the developer know that when they're going through their code, testing the application, it hasn't been developed yet or finished. So we're going to hit the break button. Actually, we're going to stop this. We're going to comment out that, or we can eliminate it altogether. And we're going to just put a message box like we learned in the previous lesson, message box.show with a hello world message in there. So now if we hit F5 again and run this, when we hit display message, we get our hello world popping up. So that's two different ways you can display a message again to the user. But again, this was done what we call dynamically in code, because we wrote it out. It's added while the program is being it's actually not added at this point with the code. So when the program is ran at runtime, it executes the load event of this form, and at that point this code is being executed to create the object for the label, object for the button, and add these controls to the form at runtime. And that's called dynamic control creation. So it's good to know how to do that. Again, you can use the toolbox. In most cases when you're designing a form, it's much easier to use the toolbox to drag and drop, resize things, set some properties, and once you build a master form, you would then create an instance of that form, because it is in fact a class of its own, and so you can create an instance of that form, or if you need to create multiple copies of that form in an application, such as say a word processor that had a editor window, you would actually use a form for each document you have open. So each document would have its own set of form properties, methods, and things that the user can do in that document that are independent of another document that may be opened in another instance of the form. So anyways, I appreciate y'all listening to this lesson. Hopefully you learned a little bit about how to dynamically add controls to a form. And again, if you have any comments or suggestions for any of these videos, please do so. I appreciate all the comments. Well, that's going to be it for the lesson. And in lesson 5 now, if you join me then, we're going to learn about the basic data types and how to define and use variables in your programs. So that's getting into some core concepts you'll need to know about what type of data types are available, how to create variables. Variables are used to store information and data within a program, so it's very important to learn that as well. But again, this is a beginner series, so we'll take things slow and keep these videos to a 10-minute or less time frame. That's my goal. So if I ran over this time, I do apologize, but sometimes there's so much information that needs to be presented and demonstrated, and I'm trying to give enough comments about it, about what's happening, but not too much. So hopefully I'm getting the balance right on this. Anyway, hope to see you soon in the next video. Thank you.